Well, hello everyone. It's Super Jesus Jackson back at it again with yet another video. This time we're talking about the controversial, mostly hated film, Joker Folie à Deux. So Folie à Deux currently sits at around 30% for both the critic and audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is absolutely insane, and I'm not gonna lie, I was almost in that camp. But today, I'm here to talk about why the film ultimately worked for me and why I think it's a brilliant film. But I already know it. A lot of you want to click out of this video. You want to comment down below and tell me that I'm wrong immediately. I totally get it, but just hear me out. Also, I'm going to spoil the living hell out of this movie. So let me start by saying that I loved the first movie. It's one of my favorite films of all time. Its themes of ambiguity, sympathy for an anti-hero, its commentary on society, culture, mental illness, and its embrace of the morbid, dark, and tragic was all beautiful to me. And, you know, we got to mention that as a standalone movie, it truly was perfect. So then, you know, the sequel was announced. I heard that it was going to be a musical, and I was like, no, why? But then I said, you know, whatever, we're getting it. The first one made $1 billion. Studio exec's gonna studio exec, if you know what I mean. And the original team is mostly behind this new one with the addition of Lady Gaga, which I love in movies, so whatever, let's go, right? So I went in, saw the movie in IMAX, which, if I might suggest, is how you should see it and how I hope you saw it. And by the end of it, I was like I said, I was almost in that 30% camp on Rotten Tomatoes and borderline thought, like, is this a bad movie? But then I talked about it with my girlfriend. I let it simmer a little bit. Then I watched it again, and all of a sudden, everything clicked. So let's first address the elephant in the room, which is the musical aspect of the film. Many people didn't like the music. They didn't like the fact that the narrative was interrupted by the music, and in general, you know, the musical aspects of the film just served as a detriment. Well, to that I say, wrong! What people don't seem to understand or think about is that, first of all, the first movie had music and dance as a part of its DNA. From Arthur dancing with his mother, dancing on the stairs, dancing on the Murray Show, the movie begins with dance. And the movie also ends with That's Life and has Arthur subtly singing it. It also has Charlie Chaplin in it and has various classic songs that play in the movie. So the second movie, fully embracing all of that and just going the musical route, it made sense. It just did. Now, the musical aspects themselves, you know, I thought worked in the movie. And you might ask, well, why? Well, again, people didn't pay attention, I think. You know, when Arthur goes to the music class in Joker Folie à Deux, the music director, whoever this person was, literally said, "We use music to make us whole, to balance the fractures within ourselves." And this was also in the trailer. And so then what happens? Well, what happens is when Arthur experiences pain, suffering, confusion, or something positive, the movie goes into a musical sequence. So when people say the musical moments didn't flow well or that they didn't make sense, it's just crazy talk to me. Not to mention the fact that the musical fantasy sequences are just downright incredible. The songs are beautiful, the performances are beautiful, the way they're executed cinematically is just great. Now, when it comes to the character of Harley Quinn, played by Lady Gaga, some people thought the character was half-baked, that she was underutilized. However, again, I think people ultimately just didn't pay attention and don't see the themes behind her inclusion in the movie. The execution of Harley Quinn in Folie à Deux was absolutely brilliant because it fully did what we expected Harley Quinn to do in the movie, while also turning that on its head. Harleen Lee was absolutely infatuated and obsessed with the idea of Joker. So much so that she committed herself to Arkham, lied to Arthur, manipulated him, set the place on fire, lived sort of like Arthur did in the poor part of New York when she's rich. She lived in his apartment. She was probably the only person that made love to him. And even then, she made love to Joker, not Arthur, because that's how she wanted it. She made him put on makeup for it. She is capital C crazy. And you can say she's as crazy as Arthur. But here's the thing. Lee, seeing Arthur do what he did on TV and reading about it, she fell in love with Joker, just like Harley Quinn usually does in the comics. I will say, though, this is where I would have liked to have seen a little bit more character development with her, but, we can assume that she's mentally ill, privileged for sure, but also is probably surrounded by a bunch of Murray Franklins in her life that she too wanted to shoot the brains out of. So then, through all her efforts with Arthur, she turned it around and manipulated Arthur into falling in love with her because she's a psychiatrist and knows that Arthur's a loner and obsessed with being loved and understood. And she gets what she wants out of him by manipulating Arthur to embrace the Joker persona more. It's goddamn genius. And I'm going to add, one of the most beautiful yet heartbreaking moments is when Arthur confronts Lee about her lying to him. And then she reels him back in with the "I'm pregnant" statement, followed by a beautiful rendition of "Close to You." That song, when I heard it, is when I was like, this movie's great. It just is. And it's so sad that Arthur's being manipulated, but it's also very beautiful to see in the way that it was executed. Because again, we have to understand that every time, these musical sequences break out, they come from usually pain and suffering and confusion, which is, I love that contradiction, because a lot of these songs, they're, they can be melancholic or whatever, but some of these songs, the way they're executed, quite, jolly and groovy and dancey. And, they kind of have this typical, big band, swingy, jazzy, musical theaterness to them, So I just love that contradiction there. And also, real quick, going back to the criticism that Gaga's performance and singing was underutilized in this movie, I think that was also intentional. If you notice, her singing and musical sequences don't become grandiose until she thinks Arthur has finally embraced being Joker. It's almost like her singing and musical sequences grew the more her relationship with Joker became what she wanted it to be. That's why at the end of the movie, when she rejects Joker and leaves him, her singing goes back to whispering, and it has this solemn tone to it. People just gotta think, man. People gotta think. Now, let's address the second elephant in the room, which is the ending / the why of the film. What does it have to say? This is probably the most consequential and important aspect of the film. So I'll say this. If you're in the, this movie was a total middle finger to the first movie camp, then congratulations, you're right. If you're in the, I wanted to see more Joker, I wanted more action and Arthur to embrace Joker camp, then congratulations. You missed the point of the whole fucking movie. If you're in the, I hated the ending because it made no sense, was tragic and dumb camp, then congratulations. You're also right. You see, the first movie made us empathize with Arthur and his journey becoming Joker. It was a rebellious middle finger to society and its treatment of disturbed, well-intentioned individuals. It was the underdog's journey. And it did all this by challenging our eyes with disturbing imagery, violence, and testing our own sense of what's right and wrong, what's funny and what's not. Well, Folie Deux explores the direct consequences of that. It's literally the direct response. Not only literally with the fact that Arthur is in jail and is set for a trial where the people of Gotham / society / us decide what his fate is, but it also introduces the conflict of identity and self-reflection, with Arthur struggling with embracing this larger-than-life persona the people of Gotham / us have burdened on him. I hope you're paying attention to me saying that this movie is ultimately a reflection on us. But moving on, Folie Deux is ultimately a tragedy. The tragedy of Arthur Fleck. This is the story of an incredibly damaged and disturbed person that bursted out of his cocoon with rage and anger to the society that wronged and bullied him, which is something that we can all relate to and wish we can do. Arthur was then forced to face the consequences of his actions, struggling whether to keep embracing the Joker persona, because he realizes that while Joker is partly catharsis for him, it's also incredibly destructive. He didn't realize how much his actions affected the good people in the world, like the woman he fantasized about being in love with in the first film. Also like Gary, like Randy from the prison. And, we know this from the trial scenes in the movie and from the events that happen in the prison following some of the events from the trial. But here's what's interesting, right, is that it's a lose-lose situation for Arthur. If he fully embraces his Joker persona, he pleases Harley, he pleases the movement and society that he created, but good people and bad people get hurt. Hell, he gets abused in prison, and he faces the death penalty because society still rejects him. Now, if he doesn't embrace the Joker persona, he loses Lee, who is everything to him. But he still gets rejected by society for his crimes and faces the death penalty and rejected by the movement he created. But the one thing he does gain from the latter scenario is that he at least dies with integrity. He dies knowing that he did the right thing and that he didn't succumb to this persona that ultimately outgrew him, to this persona that was destructive and at the end of the day didn't satisfy him. Because Arthur just wanted to make people smile, laugh, and to be liked. Not as Joker, but as Arthur. It's why, if you've seen some recent comments by the director Todd Phillips, he says to people, because, people I guess don't get it, this movie is ultimately about Arthur Fleck. And in fact, this saga, the first one and the second one, right? The first one we thought was about Joker, was Arthur becoming Joker. But the second movie, we're like, oh, no, this saga is definitely still about Arthur Fleck. It ultimately started that way and it ended that way. But I guess some people didn't realize that or didn't like that. This movie also has a huge theme of betrayal. Now, as we all know, in the first movie, he felt betrayed. In this second film, he felt betrayed by society again, by Lee, and here's the kicker. He was even ultimately betrayed by the very movement that he helped inspire, by the very people he inspired and tried to speak for. Of course, I'm referring to the end of the movie, where a random fellow psychotic inmate tells Arthur a joke, where the punchline is Arthur getting stabbed in the middle of a prison hallway. That guy kills Arthur, presumably because he was disappointed that Arthur gave up his Joker persona, because Arthur didn't go all the way with his Joker persona and set the world on fire to watch it burn, like that other guy that we saw in some Christopher Nolan movie. Arthur was killed, in a way, by the very movement he created. It just outgrew him. And this is what this movie and this saga ultimately is. It's a tragedy. And you know what I love about that end scene? It's that it embodies everything that Joker is and was. And what I mean is that the ending and Joker's story in general is so shocking and so WTF that it's almost funny. Especially when you consider the amount of investment that we put into this story. From the first film to 95% of the second film, I would say, only for it to end the way that it does. It just feels like a joke, but that's the point. Arthur literally says in the first film, "I used to think my life was a tragedy. Now I realize it's a comedy." And his jokes, too, have always been tragically and depressingly funny. The punchline is always something morbid. Thus, it makes sense that Arthur's demise is a morbid punchline as well. Not to mention that his death and the joke told is similar to Arthur killing Murray and saying, "You get what you effing deserve." And, something to tickle your fancy and extend the brilliance of this scene, well, it's the birth of Batman, but reversed. We've always known Batman and Joker to be opposite sides of the same coin. Batman's parents were killed by the same type of person that would follow Joker. The criminals of Gotham are products of its shitty culture, corrupted socioeconomic society, and justice system. And that Joker follower, at least an alpha Joker follower, if you could say, is willing to do some crazy shit to prove their point, for the movement. And it's exactly the type of person who would kill his own leader, the Joker himself. Also, what's interesting is that both crimes are random acts of violence, just out of left field, out of nowhere, and thus it's tragic and kind of funny at the same time. I mean, think about it. It's like when your day has been shitty and then you get into a car crash. It's like a huge punchline end to this shitty buildup of a joke. It's funny and tragic at the same time. But again, this movie and its story is a tragedy. It's so sad how Arthur just had no hope in this world because of the way he grew up, the world and the society that he lived in. There just was no hope for him no matter what he did. And him, being betrayed by Lee and everyone and everything was so sad. He was being manipulated too. It's heartbreaking. To me, this story is very much like a Jesus story. Jesus started a movement and he was killed for it. He was killed by the very same people he was trying to save. He gave himself up, of course, to make it even more beautifully tragic, but he would have died either way. The only way these people against Jesus, against Joker/Arthur, the only way for those people to get what they deserve is through violence. But we all know that's not right. So what do? Well, you keep your integrity. You give yourself up all the way through death. And as sad or as unfortunate Arthur's life was and came out to be, at least he passed, embracing who he really was, Arthur Fleck. Another interesting point, I think that really betters this movie, is that it begins with a cartoon of Joker fighting with his shadow. Now, of course, this is a metaphor to Arthur's internal struggle of embracing Joker or not. But what's interesting is that the Jungian shadow, which is what the shadow usually represents in literature and media, is a manifestation of repressed emotions and capacities. And it could be either good or bad. In Arthur's instance, his shadow, part of it manifests as Joker, a confident, selfish, violent persona. It's the repressed part of Arthur, and are things that help him fight back to not being accepted, loved, or respected. And we see that a lot in the first film, and partly in Folie à Deux. But in this film, we also see the potentially positive parts of his shadow as well. The shadow that aims for integrity, acceptance, and the realization that rebelling the way Joker has is not a good thing. And Arthur ultimately succumbs to that part of his shadow. What's interesting is that the cartoon in the beginning shows the shadow taking over Arthur only for police to beat up Arthur. This is the movie right from the get-go telling you the shadow will win in this film, which is true. Both the negative and positive versions of Arthur's shadow win. The shadow that aims for integrity and acceptance, which Arthur embraces by the end of the film, and the Joker shadow, which wins by Arthur getting stabbed by the psychotic person. So yeah, tell me that this movie sucks donkey balls now. But in all seriousness, I just love that this movie and its predecessor exist. That a series so thought-provoking, disturbing, and depressing exists in media. Because that's what art is for. It's the manifestation of our shadow. It's our catharsis. To do the things and explore the things that would be too crazy to do in real life. I think it's beautiful. And Folie à Deux is just so tragic, and it does not give a fuck about what you wish it was. It's a story of Arthur, his downfall, and his pain. And if you wish that it was something else, that's kind of what the point of this movie is. We all want our entertainment and people to be what we want them to be. We want to shape things and corrupt things to be what we want them to be. Whether you're a crazy psychiatrist obsessing over someone's persona, a lawyer trying to make a case for someone or against someone and twisting things to fit your narrative, whether you're an anarchistic movement rooting for who you think is your idol, or whether you're a society rooting for the death penalty for a criminal while sensationalizing him. Well, no. Arthur just wanted to be Arthur, to be understood and loved, and he suffered and died for it. It's almost as if Todd Phillips made a movie that is impervious to criticism. Wow. Well, that's all, folks. Those are my thoughts on Joker, Folie à Deux, and why the film ultimately worked for me. Let me know in the comment section below, do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you think I'm full of shit? Whatever. Let's start a debate in the comment section. Give this video a like if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more analysis and commentary like this. Share with your Joker-loving friends or hating-loving friends, if you will. If it's your birthday, happy birthday to you, you beautiful creature. But I think that's it for me. You all take care, stay safe, and until next time, I love you. You keep your integrity. You give yourself up. Fucking goddammit. So what do? Well, you keep your integrity. You give yourself Fucking goddamn it.